Strange poltergeist experience when I was younger. It was Thanksgiving at one of my aunts. In my family, everyone was always into the paranormal and claimed to have seen things, especially a few of my aunts. Long story short, there's this chair, an old wooden rocking chair that belonged to one of my aunt's fathers, who's now long passed. My aunts claim wherever it went, strange happenings occurred. Me and my mom and four of my aunts were sitting in one of my living rooms, just talking about random usual stuff, when one of them brought up the chair that was in the same room as us. In this room also was an old computer armoire with double doors. I went over and I sat in this old haunted chair and began to provoke whatever spirit was in our presence. Expecting nothing, obviously, I jokingly yet condescendingly began repeating things like, "You're not real. Do something to show you're here. You won't do anything." Literally, pretty much immediately 15 seconds of me talking and provoking, the doors burst open from the computer armoire with some force, and all the paper and printer shot out into the floor. I was in shock. We all were. I had to be 12 years old. I'm 25 now, and I still remember and feel the scare as I did in that very moment. That was the day I realized this world's not the only one. No, there were no windows open in this room. Never do what I did and provoke a spirit. Okay, so this is a pretty wild story, but I, a 20-year-old male, and another friend of mine, Jeff, a 20-year-old male, were skateboarding down this road one night. We were completely sober and loved the fun of skating down this one particular road. The road loops in a circle, so when you get to the bottom, you keep going forward to go back up to the top. That's kind of important. Commonly, when skating down the hill, we would go at the same time, with one of us right behind the other skating down it. One night, however, I was leading and went first. It wasn't until I got to the bottom that I realized Jeff wasn't behind me. So I waited at the bottom of the hill for a minute, but still no Jeff. So I turned to continue forward and walk back to the top when I saw clear as day a person made of light. They were standing there, but also slightly transparent, so it was more like an apparition, an angel or a ghost, than a real physical person. Nope, this isn't real, I thought to myself. So I just stood there a minute, ignored it, and waited longer for Jeff. But he just wasn't coming. So I decided to walk around my brightly full-figured friend and go back to the top. I was just going to forget I ever saw a person made of light. I just wanted to let it go, like it was a delusion or something. But when I got back to the top of the hill, there was Jeff. And before I could say a word, Jeff looks at me and says, "Dude, I just saw people made of light and they spoke to me about you, and me, and about the universe." I was shocked to my core. I then explained how I was down at the bottom, internally freaking out because I thought I was fooling myself. To this day, whenever I get fearful about death or anything, I think about the validity of that moment and know there's more to life I just don't understand yet. My grandmother and the psychic. When I was 10, I woke up in the middle of the night, knowing that my grandmother was going to die. Something or someone told me her death was certain, I began to cry loudly, waking up my parents. My mom came to see me. I told her I knew my grandmother. Her mother was going to die. My grandmother was not sick, and we just visited her that day. My mom assured me that my grandmother was fine and told me we would call her in the morning. I cried about my grandmother the rest of the night and barely slept. Next morning, we called my aunt's house to speak to Grandma. We talked to her and she was fine. 20 minutes later, my aunt called crying hysterically. My grandmother had died suddenly. 4 years later, my dad got a job in a different state. We moved into a new house and we were invited to the neighbor's pool party. My mom and I went and we met another one of our neighbors who was a psychic. My mom was weirded out by psychics, but didn't want to know her future. Upon meeting the psychic, she asked the psychic not to give her or me any readings. But my mom went inside to grab a drink. The psychic turned to me and said, "You look like a type of boy who likes to watch scary movies," and predicted your grandma's death. I was speechless. I didn't bring it up at the time because I knew how mad it would make my mom. Years later, I asked my mom if she had told the psychic that I had predicted my grandmother's death, and she did not. I have no explanation for what happened. A woman sang to me in a cabin, and I felt very peaceful after. A few years ago, I was camping with some friends in Dayton, Ohio. We rented a small cabin that was literally just 4 walls and a roof with no windows or furnishing. It was fine though, because we only needed it for sleeping at night. On our 3rd night, a thunderstorm rolled in. I remember dozing lightly and hearing my friends snore. Eventually, there was a crack of lightning, followed by booming thunder. I was definitely, the only one awake at the moment. Suddenly, I hear clearly female voice singing softly from somewhere behind me. The cabin was so dark I couldn't see anything, so I lied still and listened. It sounded very much like a Native American language to my untrained ear. Very slow and beautiful. There was some kind of meaning behind every word, and it was very pretty. At one point, I almost propped up and asked, "Who's singing?" but decided not to. Something inside me was telling me to lie still and not draw any attention to myself in particular. The singing eventually died off, and despite how spooky it may sound, I really did feel at peace. I was comfortable sleeping that night, and it didn't take long for me to pass out. My friends apparently didn't hear or see anything, so I wonder what everyone here thinks of this experience. Something bad tried to follow me home from the woods, and it changed everything I believe in the world. I grew up in the Kentucky countryside with my family. My parents bought a house surrounded by farmland when I was really little. I lived there until I moved to Louisville for college in 2017. I was an antisocial kid and spent most of my time just walking or hiking in the woods around our home. It always gave me peace, being away from people who made me anxious, hearing birds sing, running creek water, and wind blowing through the trees overhead. That was how I coped with everything that de-stressed me as a kid. Something to note about these woods, however, is that my family only owned about 12 acres. My neighbors were farmers who owned somewhere around 400 plus acres. Their lands consisted of woods, fields, and hills as far as the eye could see. Perfect for a little outdoor kid like me. Luckily, the farmers were all extremely lazy and didn't keep up with their lands very often. It didn't help that most of the area consisted of woody valleys and knobs, not very ideal for farming. So I rarely encountered other people on my walks, and it was just fine with me. I never went into the woods for anything other than peace and quiet. Here's where my actual problem started, by the way. When I was about 13 years old, I was walking around in a particular far out area of the woods that I knew nobody ever visited. It was too far into the woods, where there weren't any trails or fences, no remnants of human presence, except for 200-plus-year-old graveyard I found sticking out of the foliage. Yep, I found an actual graveyard in the middle of the freaking woods. Practically in my backyard, which looked completely forgotten about. I checked the 3 headstones, and they were for a man named Tom, a lady named Sarah, and another girl named Lucy. I won't reveal their last names because I don't want internet people sniffing around to find my old home. Anyways, I was extremely excited about what I'd found. As a little Indiana Jones fanatic, I felt pretty cool about finding a lost cemetery. I messed up pretty quick though. While looking around the graves, I tipped over a really small headstone hidden in the tall grass. It was definitely a headstone because of the distinct way that it was carved. There were no markings on it. After I'd seen enough, I just placed the stone back where I'd tipped it over and started the long walk back home. While taking a shortcut through a field of tall grass, my heart almost exploded when I heard someone speed up walking behind me. When I turned around, there was nobody. I'm certain I heard someone speedily walking towards me from behind, so I stood there, looking and listening. "Hello?" I said. A girl's voice came from somewhere. "Father?" Yes, I heard a girl's voice ask for her father somewhere around me. I can't stress just how far into the middle of nowhere I was. So there's no logical way any other person could have been there messing with me. I didn't stick around after that. I calmly walked home as fast as I could without breaking into a run. I don't hear her or any following footsteps after that, but God, I was still scared. When I got home, I told my parents about what had happened. I don't remember much about their reactions other than my dad saying, "Couldn't have been a ghost." Probably just to humor me. Despite how freaked out I was by that experience, I never stopped going into the woods. After about a month, I actually went back to the cemetery to see if I'd imagined the whole thing. Oddly enough, I never had any sort of paranormal experience anywhere in the woods until years when I was in high school. When I was 17 years old, I saw on some show on TV about a team of ghost hunters trying to make contact with some dead girl by offering her toys and candy, then waiting to see if the ghost child interacted with them. Typical TV crap, I know. Being a dumb teenager, though, I decided to perform a test of my own. I took one of my sister's old Barbie dolls from storage and went back to that old cemetery to leave it by the same grave I knocked over years ago. I'm an idiot, but I wasn't totally unprepared. I brought a Catholic prayer Bible with me as protection. I've never had faith in God, even as a kid, but I didn't feel comfortable without something to defend myself with. So I went out to the old cemetery and set the doll alongside the same little stone, and then said out loud, "This doll is my gift to you, and you may do whatever you like with it. I mean, no disturbance, and I hope you are resting peacefully." I went back home after that and waited until the next evening to go back out and check on it. The next evening, I followed through with my plan and returned to the grave. I found something pretty disturbing. The doll's head had been damaged. Barbie's face was completely ripped off the head itself. The rest of the doll was unharmed. To make things even more creepy, I noticed that it was still propped up in the exact same position I'd left it. almost like it was never touched, despite having a missing face. I took a picture of the scene on my iPhone for proof and started walking home. I remember getting hit by some anxiety while walking and feeling a bit paranoid. At one point, I heard those same footsteps behind me for the first time in years. Something was following me, right behind me. An invisible being, only feet behind me. Once that registered in my mind, I felt a wave of stress come over me and I felt like I might actually pass out. Somehow, I actually stayed calm and continued walking, even though I could hear footsteps following merely feet behind me. My heart was beating out of my chest the entire time. I just kept walking and didn't dare look back until I reached my own property. I reached the fence that divided my family's land from the unkept farmland, and I stopped. I still had that prayer book in my pack, and I decided to read some ominous prayer to ward off whatever was following me. I stood there and found a particularly powerful prayer that said something along the lines of, "God's foes tremble at the mention of his name, and all the Lord's sheep are under his divine protection." Blah, blah, blah. I read it out loud. I barely even finished the prayer when a massive tree branch came crashing down only a couple yards from me. The branch was definitely big enough to have injured me if I had been hit. I stayed perfectly still. I may have been too scared and surprised to move, and heard something like a pained gurgling noise coming from the woods I'd just come from. This was the scariest thing I'd ever experienced. It sounded kind of like a man choking and gurgling something in his mouth. I knew I'd just angered whatever was following me. I screamed, "You can't follow me any further. I'm not scared of you, and I know you can't hear me, so fuck off." The woods went quiet again. No more branches fell, and the nasty gurgling sound stopped. I calmly walked home and locked myself in the room to stew on what had just happened. Wish I could say I handled it like a man, but I didn't. I had a bit of a breakdown when I realized what actually just happened. Never had I fully believed in ghosts, spirits, angels, demons. But that evening, everything changed. I now know that evil entities, they do exist, even in the middle of the woods. The woods were my safe place as a child, and that whole time, I was practically playing with fire. The fucking devil lived in the same woods I was playing in as a child. I eventually told my girlfriend at the time, and she just got really mad at me. She's a Christian from a devout family of believers in the supernatural. She begged me to delete the pictures of the doll on the grave and never go back in those woods. Yeah, I know. There goes my only proof of the incident. I get it. You try arguing with this girl, though. So there. I've been meaning to talk about this shit with someone for a long time. It's hard to talk about it with people, though, because I know they're looking at me like in complete disbelief. I don't really blame them. It's a ridiculous story, I know, but my life changed after this. I think about these events a lot in my daily life. I'm not scared of the dark now, but I'm much more careful with it. There's some really bad and disturbing shit in this world. Be careful. I was visited by my grandmother 3 days after she passed away. Do you believe in spirits? I was at work. It was a small booth, and I had just finished serving a customer. I turned back around to help the next customer. There in front of me, but to the side of my counter, was my grandmother. She had passed away a few days earlier. She stood there smiling at me, and then bent down as if she was about to grab something, maybe a bag. It startled me. And I went into the back room a few feet away. I looked up at the monitor, which showed me at the front counter, and she was gone. My grandmother always wore these clothes, cool fashionable matching outfits. I don't ever recall her wearing this green one she had on. My grandmother passed away in the UK. I never got to go to her funeral, but when I saw her, I no longer cared to go. She came to me, and I'll have that moment forever. I never told my dad about it. My wife was right next to me when it happened. That was not the only time she visited. Maybe a year or so later, I'm at work again, at the same booth. The area I worked in had 2 other booths. During breaks between flights, we usually leave our counter. I was the only one in the area. The closest person near me would have to be about 80 or 100 feet away. I felt a breeze and noticed a scent. It was my grandmother's perfume. There's no explanation for it. I don't know where it came from. I did walk around the small airport trying to figure out where the scent came from. The Devil's Footprints. About 15 years ago, I traveled to Spain with one of my best friends. We were both around 20 at the time, living the carefree young adult life, just 2 guys having a great time. We were in a warm country. No carefully filled itinerary whatsoever. Just living in the moment, doing whatever we felt like. My friend, who originally came from Spain, still had family there, which made the month-long travel very affordable since they offered us free accommodation. A roof over our head, a working bathroom with fresh showers, and 3 meals a day if we liked. They also gave us a spare key so we could just come and go as we liked. During the day, we often went swimming to keep as cool as possible. And during the evenings, we often explored the city, went for drinks, or went to the club. On a certain day, somewhat more to the end of our month-long stay there, the father of our host family, my friend's uncle, took us out for a fishing trip. We had a lot of fun out in the sea, although the trip was cut short because we had a bit too much fun consuming beer. The burning summer sun, too many beers, and that wavy feeling of being out in the open sea made for a very, very bad case of seasickness for both my friend and me. His uncle, though, it was funny though. After having had an afternoon rest, or as they called it, a siesta, and a very fulfilling late-night dinner, we decided to go back out to the beach. We took a couple of cold beers with us. However, we didn't take as many as we were still feeling a bit groggy from before. It was a beautiful night, open sky, no clouds, little to no pollution, making the twinkling stars very visible and present. Being on vacation, being young, and still warm but comfortable summer night, with a light breeze and a starry sky, it was the perfect moment to talk about the meaning of life, about what we'd like to achieve one day, about what was worth it or what wasn't, if there were any other intelligent life out there, if we would live another 1,000 years or not. The crashing of the waves against the sand of the beach and the rocks, it was all very calming. It was lulling us into a meditative state. Only that moment in that place seemed to exist. There was no outside world, no life with responsibilities, no obligations, no expectations, no working hard to get somewhere. It was that moment we noticed something was off. The crashing of the sea against the sand of the beach sounded different, harder, like something was moving in it. Under the waves was a vague shape, and it started to form. As it neared the shoreline, it started to get into the shape of a dog. We both looked at each other and noticed we'd been holding our breaths for about a minute. It took the dog to crawl from the sea to the shoreline. The tension broke as we both burst out laughing because we'd just been so easily startled by something so innocent. But then my friend asked the question that made the newly regained light mood go away in an instant. Where did that dog come from? There's no one around. We never saw any dog go into the sea. Neither was there any dog swimming around. It came from under the water. Now that, having it worded it like that, it seemed rather curious, and actually that dog seemed pretty big for any existing dog I'd ever seen. As it was crawling along the beach, solely illuminated by the first quarter moon, it looked like the size of a small horse, but in the shape of a dog or a wolf with matted fur. It had very present bony joints in its knees and elbows, and walked a bit awkwardly. My friend and I were debating if we should follow the beast, and decided we actually want to find out what actually it was. I took out my phone and started to film it. For as far as a 2008 smartphone could film in the dark. By the time we reached the place at the beach, where it had left the water, it had already reached the sand dunes and disappeared into it. We saw it had left tracks and decided to follow them into the dunes. We weren't prepared for what we saw next, though. The beast had left a track in the wet sand in the form of individual hoof prints in a straight line instead of a crisscross pattern, as with any other four-legged animal. No horse could have walked in such a line, and even though it had looked like the size of a horse, it hadn't looked anything like the shape of a horse. Neither were horses aquatic animals. We followed the track into the dunes and went over the first dune when we saw the beast, standing about 10 meters from us, in a speck of moonlight. It didn't look anything like a dog either. It looked like it had the lower half of a goat, and upper half of something like a werewolf, or something. Just the dimensions were off. The shapes were awkward. It was such a big animal, neither of us could place it under any existing animal we knew of, with matted fur and bony joints that had just come out of nowhere from under the water, but could clearly walk and survive on land as well. That left hoof marks in a straight line. Because we had just stumbled through the bushes closely behind the beast and had given away our presence, it slowly started to turn its head towards us. While it was turning towards us, it stood on its hind legs. Not only was this animal that came from under the water, as well as could survive and walk on 4 legs, it could clearly stand and walk very well on 2 legs as well. The beast gained even more size by standing on its hind legs and must have been around 2.5 meters. It stared at us with red glowing eyes. These were not to be mistaken with the eyes of any nocturnal animal with reflective eyes. These were actually glowing from within. I felt stuck in my spot, completely frozen. But luckily, my friend, who was just 2 steps behind me, had the mind to run away and pull me with him. We ran for what felt like an hour, but must have been closer to 10 minutes, because we reached the house of my friend's family before we knew it. The beast hadn't followed us, or at least not all the way. We were in and told the entire story to his uncle. Of course, he thought we must have still been drunk and tired and had seen things that weren't there. But when we showed him the recording, he went pale. He took a shovel. A gun would have been more impressive against a beast like that, but it's not the average European that just has guns lying around, and asked us to show us where we had seen it. We searched for almost 2 hours, but didn't find the beast again. However, we did find the hoof marks, albeit a bit washed up because of the current of the sea. We went back home, trying to make something of what we had seen, but couldn't. We needed to know what animal we had just seen. We started Googling all kinds of things. Of course, with the lower half of the beast looking like a goat, we stumbled upon a lot of myths about the devil, which we discarded. We had seen an actual live beast that wasn't known by humanity yet, and wanted to know if any other people had ever seen anything like it. It was only when we Googled hoof marks, one straight line, that we stumbled upon the term the devil's footprints. So it was an actual thing, or at least something that had been supposedly seen before, according to myths and stories. But they must have had some truth to them, since they described exactly what we had just seen with our own eyes. The few days we had left in Spain, we spent our nights with our friend's uncle, trying to find the beast again, but to no purpose, as we never saw it again. When I came home a few days later, I saved the recording on my hard drive, not sure what to do with it yet. I didn't want to be the crazy guy that had just seen the devil, because I still don't believe I did. I just don't know what that animal or this thing was, and how come we haven't documented this beast yet. I tried to forget about it, but couldn't, and over a year later, I decided I wanted to publish the recording in hopes anyone that could make any sense of what had been seen that night. The uncle of my friend hadn't seen the beast at all at the time, and had asked around town if anyone ever seen it, which they didn't. I had switched phones by then, but luckily, I had the recording saved on my desktop, where I had replayed it at least 1,000 times. I booted up my desktop and something was wrong. I had to restart my desktop a couple times, and after booting it up in safe mode, I got the message that my hard drive had crashed. I tried whatever was possible to try, but I couldn't recover the recording in any way. 15 years later, I'm still breaking my head over what that beast we encountered could have been. But by now, it's a story my friends believe just for making conversation. Only that friend and his uncle are still branded by that experience as well. My friend even took it so far as to go live in Spain again, near the beach where it all had happened, and still continues to actively look for the beast to this day. Maybe one day he'll find it. She's here. Years later, I'm still trying to make sense of this encounter. I'm a science-based believer. There has to be a good reason behind something moving on its own. I didn't in younger years know how to tell people no. I ended up going on vacation with a fellow I wasn't really into after a lot of their persistence, not knowing boundaries. We stayed in his parents' brand new built guest room. I didn't want to do anything with him and also felt a sense of dread and impending doom. He tried to make moves. I became more withdrawn and told him that she was here. She was, even though I never really believed in her. He tried to convince me to lay down with him in bed to escape this anxiety he thought I was experiencing. I laid down, he laid down next to me. The second he reached out to touch me, a 4x2-foot panel of glass above the guest bed, right above our heads, popped out perfectly and nearly fell on top of us. He, with quick reflexes, reached his hand out and caught it, sliding it onto the floor where it shattered. We both heard what sounds of gravel, running, and a woman crying. We went outside to investigate the middle of the desert in Arizona, nowhere near a city. There was nothing and no one. He didn't believe in her. He did after. I still don't believe in her, but she seems to protect me. His family accused us of doing the deed to the point of breaking the window. We sat in opposite corners of the room after the incidents until the sun rose. Interesting experience at the Whaley House with my 2 toddlers. Visited the Whaley House in San Diego with my fiance and our 2 toddlers, 1 and 3. Neither of us are very huge believers in ghosts, but I guess you can say we're open to the idea. We didn't expect much from our 25-minute tour with the small crowd. My fiancé and I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, and the vibe was sort of purposely made to create spooky haunted atmosphere. That said, when we entered during the room portion of the house, our 3-year-old had a strange experience. She wore a leash because she had a tendency of randomly sprinting off in crowds. It's a toddler thing. The leash was strapped around her waist on a buckle. The whole trip in San Diego, she never managed to take it off. But suddenly, as we were about to proceed to the next room on the leash, it was just laying in the floor in a matter of seconds. It was incredibly bizarre. Then her 1-year-old, who's normally pretty chill, was acting like she was watching Cocomelon. She was all giddy and excited and laughing. It was so strange to see the energy switch. My dad owns a farm that is on top of an old Native American camp. Quick context, in case it might add to the story. I'm 24 now, and I'm Native American. During the time of this story, I did not practice witchy stuff, but now I do. Also, anytime I went to the property with my dad, my friends and I always stayed in separate campers, so we had it to ourselves. We could stay up late and not keep my dad and stepmother awake. My dad owns a property in Virginia that he visits every weekend. He turned it into some sort of a farm. There's basically a big mountain with a small field on top of it, and a much larger one beneath it. He has goats, cattle, and a donkey. He's had the farm for probably about 11 years. During my years through middle school and all through high school, I went with him every single weekend. Most times, I'd bring a friend. We found out about 2 years into owning the property that the land used to be a Native American camp. There's also a small cave on the edge of the property that we found out has skeletal human remains in the center part of it. The cave used to be only having an opening at the top part of the mountain, where sometimes tribal members would be thrown down as part of a sacrifice. We found out that the spot was an old native camp because 2 men showed up to our property one day and explained it to us and asked permission to go through to one of the fields my dad had recently sort of dug up in preparation to plant seed for corn. Now, there's a cavern you can crawl into at the bottom where water runs out. The water is sort of carved out a tight space where you can crawl through on your stomach. I've never been able to get into it myself, but my dad has. I'm too scared to go through it because during the summer, when it's warm enough to crawl through the water, there's usually hundreds of crickets and spiders on the ceiling, which the ceiling is low enough already to where your back is going to brush up against it the whole way through. I bring this up because my dad doesn't believe in the paranormal whatsoever. But even he has told me he gets a bad feeling from that cave. There used to be an old rotting house on the property, right next to where our campers were. It was built really weird, sort of like a spiral. It went living room, then kitchen, then sunroom. In the sunroom, you could go left and it went another room, small unknown room with a bathroom. Turn left again, and it was my bedroom. There is a staircase leading up to the attic from there. Most of my friends and I absolutely love the paranormal and everything around the topic, specifically me and this friend named Allie. One day, right as it was starting to turn dark, Allie and I went into the house. We stepped into the living room area and heard a thud from the attic. We were a bit nervous, but went on into the kitchen before we heard something start stomping across the floor above us, and it sounded like it was heading directly towards the staircase to come down. It was too large to be something like a raccoon or a possum, and a bear couldn't have got into it either, due to how the house was built. Allie and I ran out, and we stood on the porch for a moment looking in the window, but never saw anything. We decided not to go back in, and went to ride ATVs and such for the rest of the evening, just to have fun. A year or 2 after, my ex-girlfriend and I were at the farm in her camper. I'll call her E. E was heavily into paranormal stuff, even more so than I was. One night we were playing games on our computers together. It was about 11 p.m.-ish. At the time, our camper sat on a hill that overlooked the cornfield, and it also sat over the side of one of my dad's farm sheds, where we could specifically see the side door and not the huge barn door. Basically, look out the left window and see a cornfield. Look out the side window and see the door. There was a lot of moonlight at the time, so it wasn't pitch black, and we could see the field and everything else. I remember we heard something faintly scratch on the side of our camper, which is what made us look outside. We looked out toward the cornfield for a few minutes and never saw anything. The field was a good ways away, but still very visible. We both saw it. What looked like a head was going through one of the rows of the cornfield. It was going in such a way, though, that it didn't look like it was walking, but maybe sliding. We both panicked a bit and closed the curtains and tried to distract ourselves. The next night, we actually ended up using a Ouija board, one that E had brought from home. We weren't having any luck with it at all and decided to put it up. We decided to try to tell each other creepy stories and try and, I guess, make up for the disappointment from the Ouija board. At one point, we both looked out of the side window that faced towards the side door in the barn. There were reeds and such growing near the door, but we both kept talking about how one or another specific reed looked like an arm that was reaching out of the door. We kept joking about it for a bit, but after a few minutes, I shit you not, that arm-looking thing reached around the door handle. We didn't see what it was because we both freaked out and ducked down to hide after we turned the light off. We sat in silence for a good 30 minutes, and I don't remember much after that. Since then, we've had a ton of other weird occurrences. And about 4 years ago, my niece and I decided that we were maybe dealing with a Wendigo. The reason why is because she and I were going through the trails on one of our ATVs together with our small Chihuahua, Tiny. We were using one of the ATVs that was shaped like a golf cart, had a cover and glass over it, etc., and multiple seats. It had stormed recently at the time, so we were going through and cleaning branches, usual riding paths, and just having fun in general. Every time my niece and I would get out of the ATV, Tiny would just stay in the middle seat and just watch us and wait till we got back in. We always stayed in his sight, though. He was a clingy boy. Rest in peace, Tiny. He passed in 2020 at 18. At some point, Tiny started getting nervous and making whining sounds and letting out little yips. We started smelling something that smelled like rotting flesh. We didn't think much of it at first and thought we might be near a deer or something that had passed away, until we heard something from a different direction that sounded like Tiny, but it sounded like something had tried to mimic Tiny's whines. This is when my niece and I got a bit panicked. We hopped back on our ATV and sped back to the campers. Again, my dad doesn't believe in things like this, so we tried not to bring it up with him. But we did, and he laughed and said it was probably a bear or something. We went into our camper and sort of stayed there until it got dark, and until my dad and stepmother went into their own camper. As it was getting darker, we kept seeing something moving around in the tree line, which was probably about 200 feet away from the camper we were staying in. Once it got completely dark, it was about another hour until we reached and we started experiencing some stuff that actually left my niece scared as well as me. The camper we stayed in was one of those small ones that just slides into the back of the truck, super tiny. Something brushed up against the side of the camper, enough to make it tilt a bit and start shaking, hit the ground again. Then we started hearing something breathing heavily right outside. At one point, the door handle started to open, but then stopped. My niece was crying at that point. And just to note, my niece was 14 at the time. She loved scary stuff and even went walking into the woods with me at night on the property, just for fun. It was very unlike her to get this scared. I was scared myself, so we both went quiet for a long time. After we heard the scratches and breathing for a while longer, it went again. We were both too scared to even move or make a noise, so we ended up staying awake until daylight, and we heard my parents awake outside. Once we heard that, we both finally laid down and went to bed for a few hours. If people got this far and are interested in more of the creepy things I've been dealing with here, I'm happy to share, but it's a long story, so I'm doubtful. In the past 2 years, I finally got my first boyfriend, in real-life boyfriend anyways, and we still go to my dad's property with him occasionally. My boyfriend was a skeptic until some of the things he's witnessed with me up there. My experience, for what it's worth, anyone else have this happen? But I have 2 experiences in my life I can't rationalize. When I was about 8 years old, I lived with my mom and older brother. I was playing what we called the den. It was a sunken room that connected to the garage, kitchen, and dining area. This is where we keep the toys and such. I was in there playing with some toys. There was no overhead light, so the only lights were coming from the dining area behind me and the kitchen to my right. As I was playing, I see a ball bounce and roll toward me. I knew it was one of those red balls from school, but it wasn't solid. It looked like when you press against your eyes and you see the blackness and the swirling colors. I stared at it, stopped for about a foot away from me. My mom was at the dining room table behind me, but was not aware. Then I felt like I was being watched. You know that feeling. I look up toward the doorway that leads to the kitchen, and peeking over the side, as if I were being spied upon, was a figure. But it was familiar. It was my same build and shape, but made up of what seemed like black swirly stuff as a ball. It was just watching me. I stand up and moved toward it and fled. I followed it to my room where the lady glanced and the foot was just going into the closet. I never saw it again. Brain farts or something else? There are several incidents in my life which I think are likely brain farts, but who knows? They might be something else, so I'll list them here. 1. 2014, 8 p.m. I was crashing on my sister's couch, and there's a shared bathroom. I saw her housemate get out of the bathroom and went into the shower. However, as soon as I stepped into the door, I felt something and looked behind. I saw her housemate again, but walking in the other direction, then disappeared into thin air. 2. 2016. I was working in an oil rig in the middle of the forest. For your information, an oil rig is basically like a construction site with people wearing helmets and coveralls. We work out in different offices, basically looks like a shipping container each one. Company staff like me wore orange overalls, while contractors wore blue. I had to go to a different office, Office B, on the other end of the rig to meet with 2 contractors, blue coveralls, every now and then. So one time at 4 a.m., I walk out of my office, which is Office A, and go to Office B, and notice someone in the orange coveralls and a helmet walking ahead of me. I continue walking all the way to Office B, which the guy in front of me seems to be headed to as well. He was right in front of me when we were directly in front of Office B's door. However, when I opened the door, there was no one except for the 2 contractors in blue coveralls. I asked, and no one came in before me. and both of them were already inside for hours. 3. 2021. One time I saw my sister seated at a table downstairs, but when I went upstairs, there she was in her room. I looked again downstairs, and there was no one there. 4. 2022. I had a big apartment with my wife on Christmas Eve, and we slept in separate rooms that night. I saw up reading that night, and I heard a soft knock on my door, and I heard a soft, "Honey." Still angry at her, I didn't respond. The next morning I got up early to have breakfast, but I noticed my wife had gotten up earlier than me, which was strange for her. We made up the day after and talked about our experience. My wife did not knock on my door that night and say, "Honey." What was more scary was the fact that that morning, she was woken up at 5 a.m. by knocks on the window and someone calling honey, but she could not see anything or anyone. 5. 2022. One afternoon, as I fell asleep, I heard, "They cannot help you." 6. 2023. I had a dream about being haunted and heard, "Come here," as I woke up. These are some of the things I've experienced, which I think were visual and auditory hallucinations. Marriage cursed or an overactive imagination? So there will be several possibly supernatural incidents here that I thought I'd share and would appreciate comments as to whether there might be something supernatural about them, or just me and my wife are being silly. Background. My wife and I are from different countries in Southeast Asia, and we were in a long-distance relationship for several years before getting married in 2020, just a month before lockdown. Prior to that, neither of us had any experience that we thought of as supernatural anyway. Incident 1. City Condo 2020. We moved into a condominium unit, and it was pretty regular except for the weird cigarette smell that was come every few weeks from our toilet. Neither my wife or I smoke. I don't think it's something from the previous tenant either. The toilet is away and closed from the front door, and that has no windows. 6 months in, we suddenly noticed something that vaguely resembled handprints on the ceiling. Later that year, we moved back into my parents' house to take care of my mother, who went berserk crazy for months. It was sudden, no one knew or how to deal with it. 2021, I was generally quiet and a peaceful year for us, with no supernatural stuff or crazy behavior from my mother. We continued to stay in my parents' house, also my childhood home until now. 2022. My wife underwent a major operation for cancer, and after this is when more weird things started to happen. Incident number 2. Tourist Mountain. About 3 weeks post-op, I drove my wife up to the local tourist mountain for a weekend vacation. It was the sort of vacation with minimal walking and nice cold weather. We're from the tropics, so the cold is our idea of a nice holiday weather. The first night, I heard loud banging sounds from the wall, and my wife woke up in the middle of the night to someone standing over her, breathing down her back. She thought it was me and turned around, but there was no one there. On the second night, she dreamt of 2 people standing in the kitchen, staring at her. Incident 3. Wife's dreams after Tourist Mountain, Dream 1. My wife dreamt of having an out-of-body experience where she left her body and saw 4 figures looking at her. She dreamt of a famous Asian comic author dying. The next day, the Queen of England died. Dream 3. She dreamt of a coffin in my home office desk. The next day, my aunt died. Incident 4. Flagstaff. After my wife fully recovered from her surgery, I quit my job and we went on a long-planned 2-month backpacking trip to the United States and Mexico. After a 2-day road trip, though, through Arizona, we arrived in Flagstaff in the evening. After dinner downtown, we decided to check out the infamous haunted Monte Vista Hotel, as I wanted to test if my wife could see anything, given her weird dreams over the past few months. However, as soon as we stepped into the lobby, she started getting headaches, so we decided to drive back to our Airbnb. About 10 minutes into the drive, we smelled weed in the car. Neither of us smoke weed, nor was this smell there the entire 2 days we had the car prior. When we arrived and parked next to the Airbnb, another vehicle stopped by us and insisted we were driving recklessly, and he had followed us to make sure we were safe. We had no idea what we did. Neither of us drank that day, and I was driving slowly with very few other cars on the road at the time. Weird. Incident 5. Cinema. My wife had a lot of weird dreams while we were moving around Mexico. One of these became so frightening, she demanded to change bedsides with me. After we came back home from our big trip, we watched Black Panther 2 in the cinema. I booked the twin seats, second row from the back. The back row was completely empty. Around the scene where the underwater mines come in, we started getting our back seats kicked. This went on for a few times. At one point, I got up to go to the toilet. When I came back, I took a long peek at the seat behind us and saw no one. Minutes after I sat down, I get another kick. Incident 6. Honey. I had a big argument with my wife on Christmas Eve, and we slept in separate rooms that night. I stayed up reading that night and I heard a soft knock on my door and a soft honey. Still angered at her, I didn't respond. The next morning I got up early to have breakfast, but I noticed my wife had gotten up earlier than me, which was strange for her. We made up the day after and talked about our experiences. My wife did not knock on the door that night and say honey. What was more scary was the fact that morning she was woken up at 5 a.m. by knocks on the window and someone calling honey, but she couldn't see anything or anyone. That's it. We never had any supernatural experiences prior to 2020, and there's so many weird things that happened since, in multiple locations and even countries. I'm starting to wonder if our marriage is cursed or something, or could just be an overactive imagination. Is it possible I'm actually being watched? Or are my fears getting the best of me? When I first met my boyfriend, he was living in a really nice apartment. Then he quit his job and we stayed in some Airbnbs until he finally relocated for a new job. We lived in an apartment, then eventually moved again and lived in a loft. After about a year, he bought a house. Ever since we've been in this house, something feels off. I've been uneasy and jumpy and uncomfortable, been getting more nightmares. I hate moving around the house when he's not home. It constantly feels like I'm being watched. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. It's just like something sinister is staring. But when I look up, I see absolutely nothing. The TV and couch is in the basement, so I spend a lot of my time down there, and more often than not, I hear someone say my name. Sometimes it comes from the laundry room, other times from the stairs. It gives me cold chills, and I say a protection prayer, or I distract myself and play loud music. It's honestly bumming me out. I just want to feel comfortable. The weird thing is, I'm not like this when I'm at someone else's house. Is it possible I'm just being paranoid? Or maybe the house has a dark history? Or something senses my fear and it's playing on it? Haunted childhood? When I was a little kiddo, I've experienced some weird shit. looking from today. I remember a few weird situations, but can't put them in chronological, even in my mind. First, and I think less weird than others, is the situation when I woke up. Sleeping with my mom, so you can say I was around 5 years old. I saw a black hand slip through the door, like something wanted to open the door. But when I saw it, the hand slowly goes back and disappears behind the door. It took maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and by this time, I was trying to wake up my mom, but she only got up after the whole thing ended. The second situation, I was still sleeping with my mom. My bed was right next to the door, which was wide open, so I can see the corridor, the living room, and a bit of the kitchen. I couldn't sleep that night because every time I poked my head out of the bed and looked into the living room, I saw this white as snow, 2-meter tall something, because I can't say it was a person. It doesn't look even similar or something that I know or anything, maybe just a white mass. And this, whatever, had chains in its hands, if you want to call those hands, and was rumbling with them all night. I was trying to wake up my mom, like in the earlier story, but she didn't get up. I don't remember the rest of that night. Third story. I was around 12 or 13 years old. Now I'm 18. I was laying in my room in the night, watching TV. I remember that I sit on the bed to focus on something, and then someone pulled me back over to the bed. Also, the TV turned off at the same moment. I was really scared, but nothing else happened that night. The last story would be placed maybe around a year ago, so there's a big gap between these situations. All 3 of them was a long time ago, and for sure I can't remember anything that had placed then. I was a child, so these situations could be my imagination of little kiddo. But this one is the scariest thing I ever experienced in my house, and I remember all the details. As I said earlier, it was around a year ago. I was laying in my bed at maybe 2 a.m., doing something on my phone, and I heard an odd sound like something hit the plate. There was a plate on my desk, but nothing was touching it. I really brushed it off and just doing my thing when maybe after 5 or 10 minutes, this sound popped out of nowhere again. I put my phone down and was quiet for a while to listen for the sound. Nothing but silence. I brushed it off again, but was a bit curious. What was that? Still doing my thing, maybe 30 minutes later, I heard that thing one more time. I get up out of bed, put the lights on, and start investigating. I checked the whole desk and found nothing. I was a little bit scared at that moment, only by the odd sound. I laid on the bed after finding nothing and tried to forget about that, when immediately I heard it again, looked on the desk and saw a dark figure behind it, like flying to the door from one side of the room. I was in shock, barely could move. Then something hit the plate again, and my laptop turned on. I turned on all the lights, sit like that the rest of the night. Nothing more really happened, but that was enough to scare the hell out of me. I had a couple of other short stories in this house, but I told you the scariest ones. Let me know what you think. Is this only a string of odd accidents, or maybe something is in the air? Recalling an encounter years ago which frightened my dog like I'd never saw before. I've experienced paranormal encounters throughout my life. However, this particular instance was the first time my dog was nearby to witness it as well. This occurred about 12 years ago. It was around 8 p.m. and I was in my bedroom with my dog. I was sitting on my bed listening to music with headphones and sketching out a tattoo design I was planning on getting. My pit bull was up on the bed with me laying down. Out of nowhere, my dog, who isn't afraid of anything, noticed it just before me and snapped her head towards it from a fully relaxed state. She may as well have been sleeping. I looked over to my closet and saw what I can only describe as an almost spherical, cloudy white mist. Ether forming or coming out of the closet threshold while the door was closed. My dog then proceeds to put her ears back, hair goes up, and she begins leaning into me to create distance from this thing. She quickly got up, hopped off the bed, and ran out of the room. My big tough pit, eh? By now, this cloud has made its way alongside my bed, still keeping its form. I still had my headphones in, so I can't say whether or not there is an audible sound coming from it. Just before it got up next to me, it changed direction and traveled through the wall which led outside. I do recall not being at all afraid, more intrigued by the encounter. My paranormal experiences. I'll try to make this short, but it's been going on most of my life. When I was a kid, I had a recurring dream of a demon. It chased me down a hallway. Its skin looked charred and cracked. It didn't have a mouth, but when it pounced at me, a mouth would tear through the skin where a mouth would be. I started seeing it in real life, jumping on trees, standing by the backside of the road. Then years went by without seeing it. When I was 12, I had a dream again. But that was the last time I saw it until a few years later. As a young teenager, I went ghost hunting a lot. I had a very intense experience on a hunt. Something kept touching and taunting me. Whatever was there had said my name. I don't know how it knew my name. After that hunt, the demon came back. This made me come up with various theories. The dreams were visions of a demon that would be prominent in my future. An evil spirit took the form of my childhood nightmare. This time around, though, it talked to me. I had never heard it talk. It would taunt me, make fun of me, tell me to hurt myself. It followed me everywhere. The last time I saw it was my freshman year of college. But I sense it sometimes. People tend not to believe this is truly paranormal, so believe what you want. I just hope you enjoyed reading this. Please, any questions? I'm more than happy to answer them.